Hello, everybody. Good morning, and welcome back to the latest edition of the Morning Bulletin here on the Blood Red channel. I'm your host, Edward Kay. Joining me this morning is Dave Comerford, and we're going to start today by discussing some more Saudi Pro League interest in Liverpool players. They've already taken Fabinho and Jordan Henderson off our hands, but this time they are supposedly interested in two Reds players who are slightly more at the peak of their powers than Fabinho and certainly than Henderson. Interest in both Alisson and Mohamed Salah. I mean, Dave, in terms of these deals, which one do you think is the most unlikely to happen?
I thought you were going to ask me which one would be a bigger deal for Liverpool then, and almost put me on the spot a little bit. But which one's most unlikely? I think Alisson's probably most unlikely. I think Alisson will stick around at the sort of highest level, with him being a goalkeeper as well. I think you don't necessarily have to have the same concerns about longevity. Hopefully, he can carry on playing to sort of his mid-30s. And there's every indication that he's happy. And that's not to say that Mohamed Salah isn't happy. I mean, his agent came out last week, I think, and said, we wouldn't have signed a new contract if, Salah wasn't happy at the club, and we've not had any sort of discussions whatsoever with Saudi teams. I think the reason I would lean towards that transfer happening eventually is that I think it's probably one that's being targeted in 2024. I think there's an enormous interest in bringing Salah in terms of not just the kind of clubs in Saudi Arabia, but also the PIF who are owning those four top teams at the moment. I think they're going to do everything they can to bring Salah in, because he's not just one of the biggest players in the world, in kind of the Middle Eastern region. He is the number one kind of figure, I'd say. I think GQ named him the Middle East Man of the Year a couple of years ago or something like that. I mean, that just shows you kind of how much influence he has. So I think it's a hugely important deal for the league to do. That's how they see it. I think Salah, there's indications that maybe he might be willing to make the move kind of further down the line. So I think that one probably feels like a natural place for Salah to go once he leaves Liverpool. I don't know whether that'll be next year on kind of, on a deal where Liverpool are like, he's got 1 year left on his contract, let's make some money, or whether they keep him for an extra couple of years and let him go for free. Obviously, we don't know kind of the exact timeline, but I think there is maybe an acceptance in some quarters that Salah will end up in the Saudi Pro League eventually. It's just a question of when. Thankfully, I don't think it'll be this year.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can sort of see that one being one that would happen. But I mean, for now, this window specifically, do you think there's really anything to worry about here? Do you think there is a price that exists for either player in this window that Liverpool would let them go to the Saudi Pro League for?
And no, I don't think so. I mean, it's just the timing of the window. I also think that, the Saudi Pro League clubs have obviously taken Fabinho and Henderson already. They've come in for Diaz. They've come in for Thiago. They've reportedly come in now for Alisson and Salah as well. So, there's been plenty of interest. Obviously, only a couple of players been allowed to go. I think from Liverpool's perspective, they've seen kind of how much chaos they created by allowing Fabinho and Henderson to make those moves. And whilst at the time it seemed like a very good idea because you were making sort of 52 million off them combined, I think it's proven to be the case that basically if you don't have a plan in place to replace a player properly, then you can't really let them go. And we're at the stage now where there's 2 weeks left of the window and they're probably Liverpool's two most important players. So to be honest, I genuinely think that there's no price at this point. I mean, even if you got kind of a 9-figure fee for Mohamed Salah, who are you bringing in? Who's sort of available and remotely on that level? I just think that these are two completely off the table for this year. I think, like I said earlier, I do think Salah will make the move eventually, and hopefully from Liverpool's perspective, that is a lucrative one. But at this particular moment in time, I don't think there's any sort of willingness from Liverpool to do a deal. I think as far as they're concerned, unless there's kind of a fringe player, unless there's an unexpected offer for Nat Phillips or something like that, then I think the business with the Saudi Pro League is done for this summer.
Yeah, spot on. I think anybody would be amazed if they did manage to pry Alisson or Salah away in this window. I think it's very, very unlikely. But just quickly on the Saudi project overall, I mean, I think a lot of people, when there was the obvious comparison when players started going over there with the Chinese league from a few years ago, but At this point, do you think they can sort of be dismissed as eventually becoming another Chinese league and it dying out? You see now they've lured Neymar over there. They're really going for it with this project, aren't they?
Yeah, this isn't a repeat of the Chinese Super League. I think Saudi Arabia wants a World Cup in 2030, and I think they'll probably get a World Cup in 2030 as well. And that's obviously kind of long term, and that is kind of something to plan around as well. And as much as the Chinese Super League did get a lot of high profile players, they never got someone like Neymar. I mean, Neymar's got to be top 10, maybe top 5 in terms of his sort of global footballing profile. Obviously, they want Mbappe as well. That one probably won't happen, but the accumulation of stars, Neymar and Ronaldo are there now, I think is on a different scale. And I also think that the Saudi League is more ambitious and is kind of more committed as well. I think the end goal, I think, is to get Saudi League clubs in the Champions League, which might sound ridiculous, but I think we'll see that start by hosting tonight's the UEFA Super Cup, for example. I think maybe within a couple of years that'll be held in Saudi Arabia. I think the Spanish Super Cup's already held there. So that's probably how it starts. And then I think, you look at it and say, well, hang on, those teams aren't in Europe. How are they going to, enter them into the Champions League? But unfortunately in football, there is kind of so much, when there's so much money at play, things just tend to happen if sort of the two kind of parties want them to. And to be honest, I do think that's the end point for this project, is seeing kind of those top Saudi teams competing against European teams in the Champions League, because there's kind of so much money there that I think there might even be a willingness from the clubs to kind of, accept them into. So for me, that is the end goal. I don't think there was ever a prospect of that with the Chinese Super League, but I think the Saudi project is one that has, and Liverpool have seen firsthand, inspired a really sort of seismic shift in European football.
Yeah, certainly something to be keeping an eye on for now. But we'll move on to Liverpool's midfield, of course. And we're going to start by discussing the Reds being linked once again with Ryan Gravenberch. I mean, he's been linked fairly consistently earlier in the window. And now, obviously, we've seen moves for Lavia and Caicedo not pan out. He's once again being linked. But I suppose the first thing on my mind with Gravenberch specifically is, does he really solve Liverpool's issues, Dave?
No, and I kind of take the argument that Liverpool aren't going to be able to find a perfect solution. But the one thing that they have to do is bring in someone who's actually kind of a specialist number 6. I think I'd rather a player who was maybe a little bit more, well, not average, but not necessarily top level at this stage, compared to someone like Gravenberch, even someone like Kefren Turam, who has also been kind of linked again in the past couple of days, just because that's not their specialty. What is the point of moving from going from McAllister and Jones as your number 6, who are both number 8s, to just doing the same with players who are going to cost you an extra, 40, 50 million or whatever? That's not the answer for Liverpool, unfortunately. Maybe there's a question later in the window of bringing one of them in. I think people have said, replace Fabinho and replace Henderson. If you're replacing Henderson, you might want to bring in a midfielder who's a bit more advanced. But right now, for me, it's just a case of getting in a competent, well-suited number 6 as quickly as possible, moving on to a centre-back after that. And then maybe if there's money left over and if there's time left over, which I don't think there will be the way it's going, then maybe you look at kind of a number 8 like Gravenberch. But at the moment, he's not a solution for Liverpool, I don't think.
Yeah, I think one of the things with Gravenberch as well, certainly when we were being linked earlier in the window, there were a lot of indications that the player's quite keen on staying at Bayern and proving himself. Obviously, a new manager. They have just signed Harry Kane, and they're looking like a pretty decent prospect for the Champions League this season. So, I mean, with everything that's going on at Liverpool at the moment, I mean, whoever Liverpool do end up signing is probably going to feel, maybe not unwanted, but they're going to feel like they're the 4th, 5th choice, no matter who it is that comes in. So, I mean, would he even really want to come, do you think?
I think in his case, you make good points about the Bayern side of things. And I suppose it is a consideration. I think it's probably more pronounced with Romeo Lavia, just because, Liverpool kind of went for him so publicly and basically said through the media that they didn't think he was a 50 million player. Now he's going to Chelsea for something in the region of about 55, I think. I don't think, if Liverpool went in for someone like Manu Kone at Gladbach, I don't see him saying no to a move just because Liverpool went for Caicedo and Lavia beforehand. I think most players would still be jumping at the opportunity to make the move, even if, again, they're not completely first choice. And I think that's just because it would be such a good step for their career. And I think Liverpool would be wise to get into a situation where they're not competing with another club at this point, because that's just the kind of thing that lead to delays and uncertainty, which they can't really afford at the moment. So I think the main priority, I think they'll be okay to attract players. I think they've just got to make sure that they have kind of a free run, basically, at whoever they go at. And as we saw with Caicedo, get those assurances that the player is genuinely, genuinely made you his first choice before you make it a bid or anything like that.
Yeah, we'll move on to a player that maybe does solve Liverpool's defensive midfield issues slightly better in terms of the role that he does play. Ibrahim Sangare. I mean, when I saw this one, I was a bit perplexed because I think he was the sort of player that I thought his time for a big move had sort of been and gone. He'd been linked to all sorts of top clubs last summer, the year before, but nobody ever really seemed to want him enough to pull the trigger. He is still only 25, so he is in Liverpool's age range, but do you think this one would? I mean, we are sort of in a point where whoever we go for, it is going to feel a bit desperate. But do you feel like this one especially might feel like a bit of a desperation move?
I think he's probably a little bit down the list. I think the repeated rumour I've seen with him all summer is that Nottingham Forest want him. And, doesn't necessarily fill you with confidence when you're kind of going up against a team who are tipped to be in a relegation battle, to be honest. But, this is the Premier League. We know Premier League clubs have a lot of pulling power, so that shouldn't necessarily be seen as something that you should write the player off based on that. I don't think it's like I said before, I don't think he's a perfect solution, but I think it's at the stage of the window where you're going to struggle to find one of those. I mean, given the state of the market anyway, so he's a genuine option. The one key point with this, I think he's got a 37 million release clause. A lot of people are talking on Twitter about Cheick Doucouré from Crystal Palace. Going for someone like him with no release clause at this stage and with everything that's happened, you're going to get charged a huge premium and probably end up paying about 70 million. Sangare is about half that price. I think that's doubly advantageous because A, it means you can do a quick deal, and B, it means you've got more money left to, address that centre-back issue, which is also really important. So there's a case to make this move. I think, again, imperfect, maybe some slight flaws for a top team. But, I suppose with being kind of Cody Gakpo's ex-teammate, would that help convince him, things like that? So I think I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the ones that's coming under consideration at the moment, because you get the sense Liverpool are just kind of paused, hopefully briefly, to just decide, okay, what's going to be our kind of list of priorities now for this position. And I'd say, again, with that release clause, we know how much Liverpool have relied on release clauses so far this summer. I think he might be one that is on that list.
Yeah, you mentioned Doucouré there. I think Palace initially, when we were linked, were asking for about £80 million, and I can't imagine that valuation will have changed much, especially with the money they know Liverpool have. With this hypothetical £110 million, we know Liverpool don't mind recruiting from the Eredivisie, as you said, a 40 odd million pound release clause. Do you think if Liverpool did go for him, then they would look to get in a centre-back and then maybe another defensive midfield for cover? Or do you think they would, either A, run out of money, or B, probably more likely run out of time at this point?
I think it'll be a time issue. I think it's really, really important that Liverpool get a centre-back. This defensive midfield situation, I don't think anything's going to be done in time for Bournemouth now, which is a frustration in of itself. But it needs to be addressed quickly. And I think whilst fans will be relieved when it is, immediately then the focus has to change to getting a centre-back, because that would be a hole to leave in the squad going into the season. You get both of those positions addressed, and I think you're in a decent position really for the rest of the campaign. But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons, not just kind of the demands of the Premier League fixture schedule, but also, the weakness at centre-back. Liverpool need to get this defensive midfield deal done quickly. I don't see them having time to do 3 more deals at this point, certainly not 3 of the required standard. So I think my prediction would be that we see something happen in January. We know that Andre from Fluminense looks like one that could be available then. His club seemingly prefers to sell midway through our season and at the end of theirs. So I reckon that's probably a decent shout for a move in the winter. But until then, I think it'll be a maximum of 2 before the end of this market.
Yeah, hopefully they do manage to get in a defensive midfielder and a centre-back in the coming couple of weeks that are left in the window, as you said. But it remains to be seen who they will eventually go for, and we will, of course, bring you all the latest news as and when we have it here on the Blood Red channel. But for now, that's all we've got time for on today's edition of the Morning Bulletin. So, Dave, thanks for joining me, and we'll catch you next time.